Welcome to a very new episode. We are building an LGB garden railway.
I didn't think the sun would come out, but we have the first day where the snow is gone. Look, the snow has melted. It's totally wet down here. Our commuter route is still running, even though it's been in the bitter cold for a few days now, but still runs obediently. From A to B, curious to see how long the sun lasts. Yes, fingers crossed. We remain optimistic. But honestly, nothing better can happen than setting up a garden railway in bad weather and going through all 4 seasons. We could have never dreamed of that when we planned the show, so we thought, yes, then we'll just build it in the spring, summer we'll set it up. Then we just always have nice weather, and then we just have to spray down the lanes a bit with the garden hose, so that one knows what it's like when it gets wet. Now we can film all 4 seasons here, just missing the autumn leaves to complete the set. We have got a little bit more support. Let's say a quick hello to the north. Hello, Andreas. Nice to have you back.
Hi, Andreas.
Andreas, I envy your sitting position a bit. You're in the warm attic while we're still a bit cold in the rain here. But at least it has stopped raining. You promised, and first of all, thank you for that indeed, to help us with the building of the railway. Indeed, you've been an experienced garden railroader for over 50 years, you told us, and have built all sorts of things. And we once started with the starter pack, with a completely normal circle of tracks. We have expanded the expansion pack, or built with a buffer stop. As you can see, Elke, we've already built nicely, beautiful, the train station. Exactly, with a double-track station line. But that doesn't really look like a garden railway. We said we have to make some compromises here because we have limited space. We do not have the huge villa. Too bad really, Elke, isn't it? I find it quite likable. Exactly, it's a nice cozy garden or even a beautifully large garden. But in such a way that the railway also has to share the space here with a flower bed and patio. And that's why the question now is, Andreas, maybe you have tips for us for track planning. What would you do? What to do there?
It's a really big matter of faith, Michael. I started because as a railwayman, you like to travel from A to B. I'm driving here from Hamburg to Munich and not on the track all day. That means I had a starting station and a terminal station with a long track in between, and I traveled back and forth. At the beginning, it was indeed a lot of fun, but at some point, you also wanted to comfortably sit in the garden chair, possibly with a glass of milk or whatever, and just let the train run leisurely. I see one possibility. I actually need the pendulum distance down there. But the other thing is then again always the circle that you build. So, I have now extended the path from A to B in my garden, transforming it into a complete circle, which, quite interestingly, might not necessarily be visible to all. With you, it's a bit atypical. You are building on this limited area where the cameras can follow you especially well. I would still say, make a circle out of the basic idea so that a train can smoothly run. Maybe then consider adding this shuttle route as a valuable supplement. On the commuter route, a tram could easily shuttle to or from the Steinsmühlen Park Kiplur, as if an industrial railway. But the main route should certainly choose some kind of circle.
I once organized a few tracks. First, I got a brochure from LGB. Then I flipped back a few pages. Because all sorts of tracks are in there, I would never have thought how many tracks there actually are. On page 109, you can see the complete range for once. Nicely described with the theme of track system or track geometry and the various colors. Are there a few things that you say one must pay attention to? You can air much there.
And started. R1, that's precisely the radius you've installed at the front. There goes a stone cart on it. But for example, 20 years ago, a Haaser 5 coupler from LGB was released. It fits through R1 just like any other Vogt-lock, but whether that really looks nice, well, I honestly don't know. Therefore, indeed, I would always advocate for using the larger radii for the garden as well. Certainly recommendable R3. Indeed, R2 is such a parallel circle to R1. Relatively little used, but the R3, that is, without question, a very well-employed circle. Nowadays, I only ride the R3 outside, or occasionally the R5, depending on the space that is available. With you, I would certainly recommend a bit that, perhaps in the front area that one sees, take R3, also then with the matching switches included. And in the rear area, which is not so easily visible, where maybe a tunnel or something like that might be added, feel free to use the tracks from the starter packs, R1.
Okay, so I'll try to make this short. We already talked about the tunnels last time. I just briefly turned around the U-blocks you had recommended to us. And I've just briefly put it under the bridge that we've overrun here. So this here would now be, for example, an R1, a radius 1. These are now two rails attached to each other, which I've simply attached here. That would be very tight. That means it would be an area you'd recommend here in the back of the garden, where it's not so visible. Possibly hidden in a tunnel. You'd probably think of a few flowers to put over it, right?
Yes, definitely. Like around the outside. Or even over the tunnel, right? Over the tunnel, or even a bit of moss, exactly. Or right through the jungle. Yes, works the same way. And when the flowers then bloom, one can simply also around the flowers themselves, whether it's the hydrangeas now, maybe also lay this rail circle around them. Then you immediately have something blooming, something that comes anew every year.
Or even, you mentioned, jungle around it makes tracks vanish, then a bit there by the olive tree.
They are indeed permitted to be slightly higher than the train that is equipped with a locomotive, for instance.
So I say, we camouflage the not ugly, but not quite so beautiful track, which is too narrow for the beautiful train. We camouflage it with the beautiful flowers or the beautiful plants, and possibly a tunnel, and make some paths over it. Tell me, another consideration I had, so now I'll show you this briefly, what I had with all these rails, because that's what you just mentioned. You were talking about R3 and I had to swallow for a moment, because it sounds like we would need a lot of space. I brought something along, namely, a turnout with a radius labeled R3, and I just want to show it briefly for comparison. Maybe we can capture it with the camera, so you can see it clearly below. I'll remove it from the turnout here, thus allowing us to see the difference between a radius 1 turnout and a radius 3 turnout. It's noteworthy, we have to play guitar here. There's significantly more space needed for that. So then you have to plan a bit more space in the garden, but of course you can already imagine very nicely what it would look like if you planned the station, for example, with such a beautiful, slimmer, longer switch. That could look very pretty. Of course, this presents a completely different picture for the front area then. What I also found here, what means found, I just ordered it, is something like this. I'm not exactly sure where we'll incorporate it yet, but you just mentioned industrial track, Andreas, or whether we might still incorporate the shuttle route somewhere. I found a double slip switch here. Indeed, if we want to build the station big, we can also say here 3 tracks, 4 tracks, then there will be nice construction back and forth. Where do you install something like that at your place, Andreas? Or did you leave it out?
I once had double crossover switches installed, but at this moment, I unfortunately don't have any crossings with me. However, of course, it's something that is exceptionally space-saving. You can save a considerable number of switches by opting to install what is often referred to as a DKB, which stands for double slip switch, DKB, in your infrastructure.
That means it saves space. Yes, normally I would have to build a turnout first, then another track, another turnout, so I would need a lot of space in the station, and this way I can basically cross over 2 turnouts, or at 2 tracks at the same time, by installing it. Yes. Okay, great. We have the supply for once. Yes, let's see if we need them. You may pack there, Bill. Then, I actually thought it was quite adorable, hence I organized for myself, you see, a decoupling track. We've essentially pre-built that. In fact, locomotives are running without wagons here, as we're not planning yet. There, the engine loses its cars. But here we have a small uncoupling track, where the locomotive can comfortably drive over with the wagons, ensuring a smooth continuation. And then this little switch goes up here. And then the cars are virtually uncoupled. Then the locomotive continues without the cars. Could one build a siding now? I organized it here. But more importantly, yes, that looks good. Yes, much more important. But now I'll just set this aside. Look, Andreas, I've been thinking and need your advice. How do you like that?
And in that respect, it's always such an absolute eye-catcher on the track. Normally, your garden is flat, and when you naturally incorporate some mountains or hills, indeed having a bridge with it, it's always such an eye-catcher, and it looks absolutely, undeniably beautiful.
So I thought they were actually great too. I'm wondering if it's a bit too oversized for our garden here. But the much more important thing actually is, maybe you can tell me a bit about the slope. Because for example, I have practically placed it on these two U-blocks here, and thought, then we can use them right away for that. Because those were the wrong ones we bought at first. Then the train could actually drive up here. I'll just measure that quickly with the yardstick. That's now. What do you have here? Height. What precisely is this here? You can clearly observe it. It's 20 centimeters. Can we successfully make it up the slope, do you think?
To the slope, quite simply, indeed. The gradient, essentially, depends on what the locomotives are precisely capable of handling. There must indeed be a less pronounced incline in the curve from the radius, or whether it is actually a straight stretch. It is said as a ballpark figure 3%, meaning for every meter of track length, 3 centimeters upwards. If you now say that you indeed have a good 20 centimeters, you therefore absolutely need a ramp of no less than 7 meters in length to then successfully reach about 21 centimeters. So, you actually need a ramp of exactly 7 centimeters, and then you can quite easily drive up with all locomotives and 3/4 cars as well. Briefly what I understood. There will be issues from locomotives. They might go crazy.
Okay, so a 3% incline means at 20 centimeters you said 21. No, at 7m you said 21 centimeters in a 7-meter long office. 7 meters you said at precisely 21 centimeters. Indeed, 7 meters long this office is. That's quite long for the distance here. That means we would have to plan a bit deeper. But now you said it works in the curve as well. That means the curve counts too, right? But there can be less there, right?
It is. Your tracks are all about 30 centimeters long, which you currently have. Then, in the end, you can calculate how many tracks you need for that height. If you don't want to drive underneath, you'd need 22 centimeters. Then, of course, you can also put the bridge at 10 centimeters, then only half the distance is enough.
Okay, so if we now, for example, just want to meticulously plan the bridge here into the landscape, then we could, I need to quickly get the stones, then we could also theoretically take these here, saying we just take 2 of those here, at the very least we still have a few left over, and construct the bridge on top of that from the track height. Then our locomotive won't fit underneath for the second time, but at least we have a bit of an incline. It looks a bit different, landscape-wise.
One must not go significantly over these 3%, because then you will have trouble later, and it annoys you when the engines spin out of control when you want to drive with 3/4 cars. Although I have seen in the LGB range, there is a cogwheel train. That's a completely different topic. Then you can, I believe, climb up 20%. So 20 centimeters per meter.
But we're on the move in the Harz. No, us today. Exactly, that's our difference again. Okay, I think we could do something like that, even though the bridge is very dominant. And if it's a bridge, I believe it's smart. For instance, this is the longest track from LGB. Because using small tracks on the bridge makes little sense. I'd really lay such a long track into the bridge.
Correct. I would recommend anyway, once you are out of this phase where you are setting up the garden railway in the lawn, that you then switch to Lingsley track lengths. The 60 centimeter long track is very popular, so it's twice as long as the small ones you have. You now hold in your hand 1.20 meters, which is indeed quite long. The primary concern here is the shipping. You have to see if there is a store nearby that also carries this length. Otherwise, the alternative of the 60 centimeter long tracks, that's a pretty good compromise.
So, do we prefer many long tracks, or would we rather have a smaller number of long tracks than numerous short ones? Simply get in touch. We'll also cover that in upcoming episodes. In fact, we're building a ring circuit here to ensure equal electricity everywhere. However, it naturally makes perfect sense to carefully lay the cables only when we precisely know where the tracks would eventually be. So what we do there. Okay, let me summarize what I've kept in mind so far, and maybe you can add, Elke, if you've noticed anything else or if I've misunderstood something. So, wide radii at the front, specifically, radius 3 it was, I believe, and we carefully hide the shorter ones at the back, maintaining the intended design aesthetic. What was it again? Long tracks instead of many short ones. But not the really long ones, but rather the 60 centimeters, right? Yes, long ones work, but 60 centimeters are better for easy joining. An incline that is more than 3% significantly makes the engine weak. Or rather, we are not doing the engine any favors, and consequently, the cars are also becoming too heavy. And so if we actually want to ascend up to 22 centimeters, or that was now precisely 21 centimeters, so that another locomotive can drive underneath, we need a 7-meter ramp. There is indeed an extension there again. We could ask your neighbors if perhaps they might have space for the ramp. Then we could basically build the ramp over there, then we come back here again. That would actually be a pretty good idea. Okay, very nice. Andreas, how do you plan the track layout? Do you have a software or do you do it with pen and paper? In what manner exactly do you do that at your place?
No, I don't have any software. When I started, there was nothing like that. I believe there wasn't even a computer when I began. Okay, no cell phone either. That means, for me, the requirement was actually that I wanted to build my garden railway between the lawn and the beds at the edge. So I had lawn edging stones that were precisely 25 centimeters wide, and on those, I actually built my model railways. It was the directive from my supervising authority, which means from the best wife of all, that she said, please not quite through the garden, as is now happening in Elke's garden, but rather along the edge. And therefore, I didn't need to plan, but where there was lawn and then it transitioned into a flower bed, that's where the lawn edging stones were placed and the path was then secured on top of them.
That means you preferred having a few, 2, 3 tracks in reserve, thinking, maybe I bought 1 or 2 too many so I can piece something together rather than diving straight into geometry from the start.
Indeed, while my house was being constructed here, I leisurely lay in the garden and carefully set up my detailed train set. The magnificent thing about it is, I truly saw the architect and the builder looking down, wondering, how can such an adult man lie down on the lawn and play with the train? And Michael, after half a year, both had the LGB in the garden.
That's how it should be. Wonderful. Be careful, Andreas, we could also plan a bit along the side here again, because actually it would work out quite well here. I would take a photo of the garden here, Andreas, and then send it to you. Perhaps we have made such a small sketch together by the next episode. Maybe you can draw something and hold it up to the camera for us. What you would do here, and we are also planning a bit in our heads, have you slowly gotten an idea of what it could look like? Where which track is integrated or separated, so on the side or through the middle?
So, I could very well imagine it in my flower beds, but also, once again, indeed, over the lawn edge, and then, potentially, also a bit larger around here, passing by the little house, and maybe then also in front of the station. Yes, exactly, we can do all that. There are plenty of rails. I can also see myself being very likable up there. And just everything on these lawn edging stones, because I believe you get more out of it in the long run.
So there I would almost recommend that we first lay out on the grass what you have in mind. Maybe we'll send Andreas 2 or 3 photos as well, so you can share your thoughts again, as it's highly valued here. And then we start with the shovel. We have learned from you. Dig deep earnestly with a shovel. Gravel or put down crushed rock and sand, and then place the lawn edging stones on top, not quite flush with the lawn edge, so it doesn't look like hell again at the first rain. Did I remember that correctly, Andreas?
You have absolutely noticed it correctly. And I think your idea is good, to first lay out the track on the lawn as well. Then Elke must say, yes, that's how I want it. That's the plan. When we devise a sliding plan, it should say, I don't want the lawn fully covered in tracks, yet I also wish to walk through with my foot fitting between. So, in the end, it's best to lay it out on the lawn and say, this is how it truly should be.
Very good. It's meant to last beyond just a summer. Let's see the outcome. Andreas will leave it at that. We will now tentatively lay out in the next few days, and in the next episode, there might already be a little something, and then we'll bring you in again if needed, Andreas. Thanks much for now. And for everyone watching now, if you have inspirations or photos from your garden, bring them on. So, either post it in the comments or kindly share the link to your Instagram, Facebook, or whatever platform you might prefer. Feel free to send it to the email too. We've also linked Marklin in the description below. Or from LGB, that's actually a significant company, a family. And now we're genuinely enjoying some fun in the garden. However, I'd have another warm tea first, because summer isn't really warm yet. We still have to wait a bit for spring. Initiating projects early in the year ensures readiness for the summer season. I appreciate it, Andreas, and am already looking forward to it.